but you have to be exceptional. You have to be absolutely exceptional.
Coach Daniel Kim to the show.
The trend that I've seen with almost every team is they look for bigs.
A lot of players want to get in Japan.
You heard how much money some of these guys are making, more money than some of these top 5 leagues in the world. It's just what it is. He looked at me and said, "Could you give me that?" I was shocked. Oh no, he's about to...
So how does an overseas basketball coach recruit players? Well, today we hope to get a glimpse into that and more as we welcome Coach Daniel Kim to the show. Coach Kim has coached in multiple years professionally with stops in major markets such as Australia's NBL, the NBL 1, and he's currently in Japan's B3 League. That makes this an invaluable listen for any players looking to learn about how a coach thinks and ticks. Coach Kim, how are you doing today? Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, I'm great. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure.
Great. Well, Coach, I want to know, you were working in Australia for years, but this season you switched over to Japan. Why is that?
I had a great opportunity to work again with the head coach of the Tokushima Gambros, DeMarcus Berry. We'd had a couple opportunities to work together in the past. And essentially, when he got his opportunity in Japan as a head coach, we'd always talked about the prospects of working together. So, he'd reached back out to me and, essentially told me that, he'd love for me to, come over and be his lead assistant. So here we are today.
Mm-hmm. And as a coach, do you think, what would be the prospects of seeing Australian basketball where you were in the NBL 1 versus Japan B3 or even B2 basketball? Do you think there's more of a future for you in coaching in Japan or Australia, or where do you think there's more growth potential?
I think there's more growth potential in Japan because there's more teams. And as the years go by, Japan has a lot of futures to expand and potentially form all 3 leagues into one. So I think, because of the fact that there's more teams out here, there's definitely more opportunities for me to potentially grow as a coach and, to essentially have a chance to prove that, I can run and be a part of a successful program and be a significant contributor to that. And, that's why for me, I think this is a great first step for me, stepping into the Asian market and Japan being the first country in the market.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to on-court play, what have you noticed in terms of differences between Australia and Japan?
That's actually a great question. I mean, obviously the game has really transformed over the years all across the world. The NBA game, for example, the 5 out, the spacing, the pace has changed. More teams are playing out of concepts rather than just point A to point B type sets. I would say that in Japan, I've seen a lot of, European influences, a lot of horn sets, teams that want to play primarily through the post. I mean, for our team, for example, we play 5 out. We preach, space and pace, and we preach, essentially playing, around the rim and also playing out of open, catch and shoot threes. And comparatively speaking, though, between this league and I would say, the NBL, NBL 1, I would say NBL and the NBL 1 is starting to trend towards more of that, 5 out conceptual type offense as well. But I think Japan is starting to get there. I have seen some B1 and B2 teams play a little more 5 out, but I think as the game grows, it's you're going to start seeing every team almost trend towards that direction of wanting to play with a little more freedom, and play out of more concepts.
Mm-hmm. And what about in terms of imports? What do teams, what are they lacking and what do they need in an import? Because the other day, I was speaking with a player who was playing in the African market, and he said how a lot of African teams, they lack a point guard, really. They need someone to organize it because in Africa, typically, they have great athletes, they have big players, big athletic guys, and they just need someone to kind of put them in the spots to get them to score, whereas you may see somewhere like in Europe, for instance, there's bigger bodies there, but sometimes they need a more athletic body to help them out or to fit some sort of niche. And when you look at the Asian market, often what coaches will say is that, the demographics of it, it's a little smaller in terms of how big the players are. So what type of traits, I guess, do they look for in a Japanese import? Is there specific things, or will it really depend on the team?
The trend that I've seen with almost every team is, they look for bigs. They're essentially looking for bigs. They're looking for size. They're looking for athleticism, which is what most teams lack in their locals, so to speak. We as a team, like, we really focus on finding players that would fit the mold, where it would essentially be 1 through 5 positionless. Anybody could play anywhere on the floor. So I would say our team is quite exceptional in that sense for our league specifically. But for most teams, they are looking for players that range anywhere from that 3 to 5 position, that can bring size and length and athleticism. So I would say bigs and potentially wings as well. I would say that's what most Japanese teams are looking for out here, and that's what they're probably missing in their locals.
Yeah, that's amazing insight, because a lot of players, I know when I speak to them, a lot of players think that they can just apply to any market and it doesn't really matter, and that they're good enough that whatever market they apply to, they'll get an opportunity. And the fact of the matter is that some markets are tailored more towards certain body types and certain types of players. So for instance, the most famous example is in Asia, where bigger guys, just like you're saying, just like you confirmed right now, like the 3 to the 5, that versatile type of big who's like 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", around there, and they can do all different types of things. So that's amazing that that's something that you've actually seen, because now we actually see it, players can see and hear it, that that's actually the case in your experiences as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, I will point out the fact that there are a few guards out here as imports that are playing in Japan, but you have to be exceptional. You have to be absolutely exceptional wherever you've been in the world. Like, you really have to show that you are just that great of a scorer. You've been on a winning team before. We have a couple of players in this market, for example, Trey Boyd. He's a point guard. He played in the TBL, but he also proved he could play at higher levels. Played in Finland, won in the New Zealand NBL League, then went to Pro B, and now he's landed himself here in Japan. And so for me, you really just have to be exceptional to be signed as a PG or a shooting guard. But like you said, I mean, and you pointed out, you pretty much, most teams are looking for any position from 3 to 5.
And even though this is the B3, because I don't want viewers or players to get it twisted, even though it's the third division, this is a highly, highly coveted market. A lot of players want to get in Japan. A lot of players want to play in this market. So it's not like just because it's the B3, you guys or the teams are signing rookies in this league. They're experienced players, like you're saying, or at least that's the impression that I get. Is that something that you've seen since you've been there so far?
Oh, 100%. I mean, there are definitely a lot of Japanese locals and imports that could easily play in B2 or B1. Again, everything comes down to, for example, there's a lot of players, a lot of Japanese locals, I would say, in this market that could have easily signed on with B1 teams, but they just wanted to make more money and potentially have a more significant role. Therefore, they decided to play in B3. And even some of these imports, like, if you heard how much money some of these guys are making, they're making probably more money than some of these imports that are playing in some of these top 5 leagues in the world. Like, that's just what it is. And, the money in Japan is growing, and it's going to continue to evolve. And, I would just say that, to kind of add to the point of B3 not being a cupcake league, just because it's the third division, people have to understand that it's a 52-game regular season. It's 52 games. And you have to have not just, the physical capacity, but also the mental capacity to be able to actually be able to go through the weekly and daily grind of, playing back-to-backs, and then essentially maybe only having 1 day a week off, and then being ready to back it up, going into a Tuesday, and then being ready for your next opponent. So it's really, not just physical, but mental. And, that's what makes this league really tough.
And do you guys practice? Do you practice, like, let's go through a typical day. Would you practice twice a day or lift in the morning, or how would it work?
For our team, we did 2-a-days. We did 2-a-days in preseason. A lot of players hadn't experienced that before, with their previous teams. But we did tour days. We did a shooting session where it was non-contact, a lot of conceptual stuff, a lot of player development, and then we did another session in the afternoon, so to speak, where it was focused on contact, playing 3-on-3s, 4-on-4s, 5-on-5s, essentially focusing on specific things we wanted to get better at. Now going into this regular season, we only train once a day, but for example, if we have a game on a Saturday or Sunday, we atypically would come back the following week training on a Tuesday, so only have about a day off. Tuesday would be a very light day where we just get a whole bunch of shots up. We come together as a team, we watch film, we break it down, we talk about what we need to get better at, address any issues, concerns, things that the players feel like they want to voice, and then we go back to essentially the floor and focus on small increments of what we want to focus on and get better at going into our next game. So we're a big, defensively focused team. So we do shell drill every practice, even on a Tuesday coming back after a back-to-back. It would be only in the half court. It would be like a 2-on-2 shell to a 3-on-3 to a 4-on-4, just drilling out principles that we preach and we focus on every week going into every game. And then we build on that going into a Wednesday where we have full contact. We're getting up and down. Everyone's taped up. We're scrimmaging in cycles, focusing on specific situations. Then on the Thursday, it'd be the same deal. The day before our first game is very light. It's very similar to a Tuesday. We just focus on getting a lot of shots up and just walking through the other team's sets that we've essentially drilled, from a conceptual standpoint, starting on the Tuesday. And then that would essentially be our week leading up to game day.
Right. So it sounds like it's quite professionalized, even though it's in the B3. Because, for instance, you don't always get that in the lower divisions, because we could, for instance, look at like the NBL 1 in Australia, where you also coached. Sometimes I've heard from a lot of players that sometimes the teams will only practice maybe like 2-3 times a week, and they may play one game a week, and you may see each other 2-3 times a week, and then that's it. But here in Japan, as you're mentioning, you guys are doing something essentially every day, other than on the day after the game day. So it seems like it's very professionalized, even though it's still in a third division in Japan.
Yeah, and I want to give credit to DeMarcus Berry, the head coach. Like, he's come from a unique background of coaching. He's seen what winning looks like. He's been there before. He worked with a team in the G League, so he understands what the workflow of an NBA team looks like and what potentially equates to success. And he essentially brought that blueprint over to Japan as well with the Tokushima Gambaros, which is, I'm sure people are going to find out pretty soon. It's a new franchise that's just entered into the league, and because he's brought in that winning blueprint and that environment and surrounded himself with staff that share that vision, we've essentially created a very professional program, which is quite rare, especially for a first year team.
Right. So let's switch gears a bit. So now you're in Japan, but you weren't always in Japan. You got your start and you got your break in Australia, which is another huge market. Not only did you coach in the NBL 1, which we will get into, but you also were an assistant coach in the NBL, which is one of the biggest leagues in overseas basketball. How did you actually get your start into coaching, and how did you break into the Australian market?
This will take me back. So I started coaching when I was 19. And, believe it or not, I was actually coaching high school basketball, but I'm talking like really young ages and, damn near, bottom of the barrel type teams. The majority of these students, they don't even play basketball. They decided to just pick the sport because their friends were playing it. Majority of them probably came from, rugby, football, hockey, whatever it is that they were really truly focused on. So, for me, it was a breath of fresh air, because I felt that if I could convince a bunch of students that didn't really enjoy basketball as their first option, that were really there just to kind of muck around and I essentially just, use it as an extra time to hang out with their friends. Then I knew I had something going as a coach to be able to convince them to want to actually buy into what I was trying to preach to them. So I started there. I coached boys and girls, multiple schools, and then it wasn't until I was really 25 that I truly realized that this was what I wanted to do. And this kind of goes back to Demarcus Berry. He saw something in me, and he told me that I should really get into coaching and really invest my all into it. And for quite some time in my life around then, I wasn't really too sure what I wanted to do from a profession standpoint. I'd gotten a degree in teaching. I'd done a whole bunch of different jobs up until that moment. And then when I met Demarcus and he just spoke to me, he told me that, hey, like you really could be a great coach, and I really believe this is something you should be doing. So after that, I essentially kind of kickstarted my career at St. George, which is an association in New South Wales. And, I had an opportunity to be his assistant there, work with a few junior teams. And from there, I started reaching out to NBL teams because for me, I thought, this would be a great opportunity for me to develop professionally, really get to see up and close how professionals work on the day to day. What do coaches, focus on? What do they preach? How do they go about their business? And one coach got back to me out of, I believe it was the 8, that was there at the time. And Rob Beveridge, he reached back out to me pretty quickly over email, and he just said, "Yep, no, please feel free to come to our practice." And that was about an hour and a half away from where I'd lived. So I drove an hour and a half there, and I remember, he was so welcoming, and, just seeing what he did on the day to day really, just inspired me as well, because he was such a player's coach. He could resonate with anybody on a personal level, and, he would always, give it to you straight. And I would take mental notes, physical notes, of course, as well. And then, as I kept coming to practice, he eventually started giving me just a few little responsibilities. Hey, could you, do you mind if you just help rebound for the players? Could you just help out with the shot clock? Help out with the scoring? Could you just could you help this player out with some free throws? And those little things right there earned me a lot of trust with Rob Beveridge. And we'd gotten to know each other on a personal level to the stage where, he'd feel very comfortable to talk to me. And, growing it, us growing our relationship there allowed me to essentially have a role with the club, with the association, and the Illawarra Hawks, which I'm very grateful for. And, again, there was this one game where we were getting absolutely destroyed, and I'm pretty sure it was the New Zealand Breakers. And at halftime, he would ask us, for our notes and, for stats. And, he'd ask me to keep track of specific, statistics. It was how many kills do we have? Kills were basically 3 stops in a row. How many paint touches have we given up? How many post touches have we given up? But he'd also noticed one day that I kept a whole bunch of notes over the first half. And this was my way of essentially preparing myself for if I was ever given an opportunity to be an assistant coach at that level, what advice would I want to give to the head coach? So I was almost using it as practice. But he'd never asked me for my notes because he'd never seen them. And that one game, he'd actually seen my notes. He'd looked at me and said, "Could you give me that?" And I was shocked because I was like, "Oh no!" Like he's about to read a whole bunch of brutal, honest truths, that I'd essentially written down, for my eyes only. But he read it and he looked at me and said, "I need more of this." And from there, he'd given me more responsibilities. And then as a result, he'd given me a title within the team. And that led to me then securing another role the following year, helping out with scouts, helping out with the video, and essentially just assisting on the day-to-day. With practices and game days at home. So that's kind of where like my big break began. And from there, it trickled down, got an opportunity, to work with Will Weaver at the Kings, which I'm very grateful for. He kind of really showed me what an MBA workflow looked like. And then I also thankfully got to work with the Adelaide 36ers. CJ Bruton was great. He gave me an opportunity, gave me a big voice as well. And I also got to work with Liz Mills, who worked in the BAL in the African League too. So, but the common thread between all these people was that they all saw something in me, and they all believed in me to give me an opportunity to work with them and to learn and grow with them. So I'm pretty grateful to have those people in my corner. Of course, there's many other people I could mention as well that have given me an opportunity along the way and have really guided me and mentored me. But as far as experiences, I guess my point is that I wouldn't be here if people didn't vouch or see something in me throughout my life.
And is there anything that you think you did to make them see that? Like, what do you think on your part? Because it's one thing to say how these people gave you an opportunity, but it's another thing to help yourself so that you can create or somehow put yourself in a position so people can give you opportunities. So is there anything that you personally did that you think put you in that position?
I know I'm dropping a lot of names here, but these people have really been influential. I mean, Steve Carfino is one name I want to speak on. So this he played professionally in the NBL a while ago. He had a great career, and he's been living out the rest of his life in Australia. Had kids, and quite a popular name in Australian basketball, specifically in the community there. And he'd seen me coach, and he'd given me an opportunity to essentially be the head coach for a high school program, one of I would say, the top programs in New South Wales. And he'd essentially told me that the reason why he had hired me was because he knew that I had a work ethic and an energy and a drive that not many other coaches essentially had within them. And I was like, well, that is that. It's such a generic thing, right? Because you think most coaches have this drive, this will, this passion, but he essentially said to me that I had this presence where I had the ability to make people believe that that they could do anything. And he also saw that this was something. Basketball was my life. He recognized that this was something that he felt that I was born to do. And I guess I can't speak for everyone, but I guess my work ethic is probably the common denominator for all the opportunities that I've so far been given. And also, I would say me just putting myself out there, for these opportunities, emailing, putting together, sample projects where I don't expect anything in return, by just, showing them a piece of my work, a sample size of my work, so that they can get a gauge of what I can bring to the table. So I guess that would be my point of difference.
Yeah, coaching is such an amazing and rewarding profession, because I've done some of it myself, and but it's not all, like, it's quite a difficult profession at the same time. What's some of the most difficult or toughest things that you found coaching professionals?
It's a good question. I mean, I think depending on what hat you're wearing, you have to take a specific approach as a coach, as an assistant coach to a head coach. Your approach with players has to be really different. I would say that what people don't understand about professional, athletes in general, is that they're people first and foremost. They go through things like everybody else. And, I've dealt with imports, players, all across the world that, from the outside looking in, you'd think, wow, they've got their life made. They look like they're having such an amazing time, like they're living the dream. But what people don't really see is the struggle in between, whether it be injuries, whether it be, the feeling of being a little homesick, I suppose also dealing with, any issues back at home that's going on that they can't really control, and even just mental health. Like, as a coach, the games are the reward. Like, being on the court is the reward, but what goes on behind the scenes is where the real work genuinely is. Really just, creating a supportive environment is really the number one priority. You got to establish with any professional team that I've been a part of so far. So I would say that's probably been the biggest surprise for me when I first started, was just understanding that, basketball is like the secondary. It's really making sure that everyone across the board, players to staff, management, everyone is mentally, emotionally, in the right, and everyone's good, and just ensuring that you have the right, I suppose, the right infrastructure in place to support those people.
Yeah, and that's a big if you have the right infrastructure in place. Because, for instance, I was speaking about this the other day. It's a really difficult dynamic in professional basketball because, for instance, the coach wants to a lot of coaches want to develop the players the right way, and they want to win the right way, and they want to put a system in place. But then the problem becomes, well, if the coach is doing this and say there's like insubordinate imports and the imports don't want to listen, or your best players don't want to listen, they don't want to buy into it. Okay, then you either have to bench the imports, you have to punish the imports, somehow you have to rectify that problem. Maybe you cut the imports, you get new imports. But then the problem that happens is that if you start doing that and then you start losing games, but you're playing the right way and you're thinking long term for the organization, well, then the owner might think, well, you can't keep on doing that because now the fans stop coming. And as you know, at the lower levels, you're so dependent on ticket sales. You're so dependent on fans actually coming to the games. So then it's like this huge vicious cycle that happens in overseas basketball. And the fact that the coaches, they want to play the right way and they want to implement a certain system, but long term it may not even be viable. It may not even be possible because then the owner has the financial pressures from the fans, and then they want to see a winner, and the fans may not have, well, let's be honest, the majority of the fans will not have an understanding or won't even have the patience to think, okay, we're going to wait this out for like 2-3 years when these young guys, they develop, and then we're going to be one of the best teams in the league. So that is a huge problem that I've seen in overseas basketball. And that's like one of the biggest difficulties that I've seen for professional coaches. I don't know if you've experienced that as well.
Absolutely, and this organization that I'm with right now. The ownership has been amazing because there was full transparency about what our goals were for year one, what we wanted to achieve, what the realistic expectations had to be from jump, especially with the roster that we had. Now, obviously, for us, we believe that no matter what we were going to have, we were going to find a way to make it work and essentially have a winning season. So far, so good. But I guess for me, it really just comes down to how much transparency there is between the coaching staff and also the ownership group and the general manager, because everyone's expectations, in my experience, sometimes differ between coaching staff to ownership to the GM to the assistant GM. And as a result of that kind of miscommunication, I've genuinely seen teams fall apart because of it, because it all starts from the top. It all starts from the top. So if everyone doesn't have that same energy and that same vision, the messaging is going to be completely different across the board. And that's where you get confusion. That's where even players start feeling the impact of it, whether it's a lack of resources coming through, whether it's, one owner saying something to a player, or the GM, saying a conflicting message, to what the head coach is preaching to the team. So again, having a good line of communication from top to bottom is so important, and I can't emphasize that enough. Since day one, like any organization, you're going to have a few issues here and there, but we've been thankfully blessed with an opportunity to create a culture where communication is number one. And for example, in Japan, and I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but I want people to understand this. In Japanese culture, they have something here called kohai senpai. So essentially, if if you're even a year or two older than somebody, then you if somebody's a year or two older than you, then you can't talk back to them. And most Japanese teams, have this culture where you know if a younger player has something to say, they can't really voice it because it would be considered disrespectful, and it's not. It doesn't fall in line with the culture. And for us, we've come in and said, look, we respect that's Kohai Senpai culture. We respect it, but we want you guys to understand that when it comes to basketball, when it comes to this business of basketball, we need everyone to have a voice because we all need to be on the same page. And if you're not on the same page and you feel something a little different, you're not happy with what's going on here or there, or you disagree with what I'm trying to tell you, I need you to tell me because we all need to be on the same page from players to coaches to staff, support staff, so we've really been able to establish a healthy culture from a basketball standpoint where, everybody has a voice from, the older players to the younger players. But we have a relatively young team, so that we haven't really had that as significant as an issue that we might have had with an older team per se. Um, but yeah, that would be kind of like, I suppose my insight, which would be, communication is key when it comes to, essentially creating a winning environment.
And on the topic of communication, when it comes to in the past, when you've been a head coach, have the owners ever said specifically to you how you should be making your basketball decisions, as in which imports they want or how they want you to play? Or how does that back and forth go with the owner?
Good question. So people have to understand that, owners to whatever capacity they're involved with the club, they all want to have something to say, especially or be involved with the process because in the end they're the ones putting the money in, right? They're the ones investing, so they want to make sure that A, they're investing in the right person, but B, that person is essentially investing their money in the smartest way possible. Thankfully for me, I've come across good people that have been willing to essentially allow me to have free reign over that recruitment process. For example, when I was the NBL one head coach, but I did it the right way. I came in on my first interview with the owners and brought I think it was a 30-page proposal on how I had planned to enact change within their senior NBL one program, and what I felt was the common trend that equated to winning amongst a lot of these other bigger organizations, and what we needed to do to essentially kickstart our program in that direction. So because I brought a plan and I showed that that I was willing to drive that plan. They were willing to give me a lot of leeway to essentially run with it, but every step, of course, I had always made sure that I communicated with them. If there was a player I was interested in, I'd plant that seed early and say, look, there's this player I'm looking at. I'm just letting you know that this could be a possibility, but I'm going to do my research and let you know what I decide to do. And of course, ownership would always ask me, what do you think of this player? Well, this player, played for us last season. What do you think of them? And for me, I'm big on I'm big on healthy dialogue where I'd like to ask a lot of questions myself. Do you feel this player should be coming? Do you want this player to return to the club? Is there a reason why? Okay, yep. If that's what you want, I'm ready to go with it. The reality is, no matter what situation you go to, you're never going to completely have it your way. You're going to have to accept some things, and in order to get something back. But thankfully, in my experience, they gave me full autonomy, to essentially run the program the way I wanted to and bring the people I wanted to bring in to create the environment that I essentially had envisioned for the MBL one program. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yes.
Yeah, it's definitely a delicate balancing act because I remember when I was playing, there was an owner who we had, and the thing is, for a lot of owners, this is the case, I believe, in a lot of these markets, a lot of the owners, they're not necessarily basketball people, but they get into ownership for different types of reasons. It may be like a vanity project, because you have to remember a lot of these teams, some of these teams are in smaller villages, smaller populations. So they know that if there's a basketball team in that little small city, and then they want to say run for office or something with politics, or they want to do something with their business, they're always going to see the owner and everyone's going to say, oh, thank you to that person. Thank you to that person for bringing this team, for bringing this little village, this little town, this little city, this type of publicity or this type of fun within the weekends or whatever with this team. So a lot of these owners, they may get into it for not necessarily with basketball expertise, but they're getting into it for different types of reasons. And then it becomes a really delicate balancing act because, like you said, usually they want to get involved in some way within the team. And sometimes they may overstep their boundary in the sense of they want to make a basketball decision, but they really don't know anything about the team or about how a team functions. And that was one big problem for me. I remember the one time I was having like lunch with one of my owners, and then he said, hey, Jose, what do you think of getting this player? It was a former player, a former import who used to play in the league. And I said, oh, he's good. And then he asked me, what position does he play? And then I was like, oh, he's like a 3-4 maybe. And then he's like that. And then he literally asked me, he said, that's the one who brings up the ball, right? And calls the plays. And I was like, no, that's the point. That's the point guard. But that just shows you that some of these owners, they really have no idea, but they're, like you said, they're footing the bill and the team doesn't exist without the owner. So then that trickles down to the coach and the owner dynamic. And that's a really interesting part that a lot of people don't even think about in overseas basketball is how do you navigate between having the owner being heard and you also as the coach being able to run your own system. And that's just very interesting hearing your stories as well, because it seems like you've had to basically do the same thing and kind of do that balancing act between the two.
Yeah, but I mean, I will say this, in my experience as well, again, with every team I've worked with, a lot of this is also, contingent on what kind of relationship you have with ownership too. And, for me, I'm really big on trying to establish a strong, healthy relationship from jump, letting them know that, hey, I'm all in and, I want to work with you and create a good, healthy working relationship where you can voice, any concerns with me, and vice versa. And that we're in this together, like almost like a partnership, right? And, I think obviously the reality is that, not every owner is hands-on. Some owners, kind of watch from afar and, just kind of let, see it all unfold. But some owners are just super hands-on. And, I've kind of seen, the benefits and the pros and the cons between both situations. But I would say, for my advice for coaches that do struggle with really hands-on owners, I would say really ownership in general, management, the board, whoever it is you're dealing with, I would just say, show them that you have a plan. Show them that you have a plan. Show them that you have a vision and that you're confident in that vision and that you're willing to take full accountability and ownership of this plan and really let them know that, hey, like I'm here to work and that, I'd love to build a relationship with you, and let you know that, I want you to be a part of this journey. I want you to be a part of this journey because I think the moment you show any type of resistance, to hearing another voice, whether, it's logical or not, I think is the moment where you start, where you're going to start to fail because again, this isn't your money you're putting in, this is somebody else's money. So, communication is the number one priority when it comes to having a good, healthy relationship with ownership and management.
And speaking of having a vision and having a plan, take me through the process of when you were the head coach of, say, like the NBL 1 team. How do you recruit your imports? How do you recruit your foreigners? As in, do you just go to a connector? Do you go to some guy who you know? Do you go to players who you have a good relationship previously with? Do you go to combines or exposure camps? Or how do you actually go through the process of recruiting a player? Because I think this is like super key and super important to players because it's almost like a mystery to them. They don't understand. They think that they can just cold call any type of coach and then maybe they'll get a shot. But I believe coaches actually go through some sort of process of how they recruit their foreigners. So what is your specific process for how you get a foreigner for a team?
For the Inner West Bulls, I relied on personal relationships from abroad. So I relied on people that I had trusted and known to essentially connect me with, players that they've either had experience coaching or that they've coached against, or they've personally seen up and close themselves that they could potentially vouch for, or essentially point me in the right direction with an agent. I've been able to develop some good relationships with agents over the years because I've had some experiences going to summer league. And I've really kind of gotten to seeing what is available out there as far as players that are looking for a kickstart into the NBL one market. And for me, my experience was I went through a friend. He gave me a few names, and I started building some relationships there. One player though in particular, I'd met him through LinkedIn because DeMarcus actually he had tagged my name onto this player's post because this player said that he was available, and my name was tagged in this post, and immediately I believe either he reached out to me or I reached out to him, and we started building a relationship for a few months, just like I did with the other player. Just build a relationship, get to know him a little bit, understand who he is and what he's about, do more research, watch film on Instat to see what they did in the league that they were playing in, getting a gauge of how does that translate to this market. And really from there, I suppose that's how it all came together. But from me personally, I like to go through personal connections that I've built over the years, where I can personally say, look, I trust this coach's or this person's knowledge of the game. I trust their eye for talent. I trust that whoever they refer me to is going to bring good character and professionalism. So for me personally, that was the avenue that I'd gone through.
Wow, that's amazing. So that basically confirms that players need to be building their networks. They need to be definitely trying to get in different circles, getting their name out there. So yeah, that's super interesting because not every coach, I guess, it's obviously going to vary or it's going to differ based on the situation too. I know some coaches, when they're in a lower budget team or a lower market team, sometimes they'll just go through exposure camps. Like they'll literally go, there's an exposure camp in the country, they can save on a flight and they may sign a few players from that exposure camp. But in my viewpoint, the majority of coaches do exactly what you said. They either go through personal relationships, previous relationships, or they go through a trusted agent or some sort of trusted connection between the two. Because essentially, like you said, that acts like a barrier because you know that when you're working with that agent or when you're working with DeMarcus, who is your head coach currently in Japan, for anyone who's listening, he has an eye for talent that you respect and that you trust. And you know that if he recommends this player, okay, it may not be a guaranteed thing, but it's going to be the closest thing to maybe a guaranteed thing or maybe a sure thing. So that's a real important aspect, and it's really interesting hearing you go through your process of it.
Man, and like I'll give credit to I'll give credit to guys that reach out personally because it does take a lot to do it, and granted that I think most people probably do the whole copy and paste, and maybe if they're efficient and smart with it, maybe change the name to hey Daniel or hey coach, and just copy and paste and just message and email coaches endlessly. But I will say that approach, it can work if it's done the right way. It can work if it's done the right way. Like I've had, and I really make it a point to try and reach back out to everybody, even if it's me just saying, look, I'm sorry, there's no opportunities available here, but I wish you the best. At the bare minimum, at least, I'm always willing to reach back out to people because, for me personally, I understand what it feels like, to not get an email back, to not, to just get my message, just left unseen. And, I know sometimes, it takes a lot, to message someone, with the hopes that you might hear back. And so I would say, don't go, I wouldn't say that's a complete no go, but like you said, it's important that you do expand your network the right way. Introducing yourself the right way is probably really important too. Just, messaging somebody and saying, hey, I'm 6'4", 100 and something pounds, and I averaged 30% from the field, 10 points a game. Here's my highlight tape. And that's that. I don't think is the right way to go about it. And again, a lot of that might be education, like what you're doing, for a lot of athletes right now, which is, massive, credit to you and shout out to you, of course. But, I think, again, a lot of it, genuinely comes from people just not understanding the right way to approach coaches and general managers in order to essentially build that relationship. Because for me, I am a relationship guy. I believe in, getting to know somebody and understanding who they are as a person first and foremost before it goes anywhere else.
Yeah, and it's very, if you were paying attention as well, it's very interesting that the coach or the player that you said you signed, it's not like you signed him outright, like within the first week of meeting him when DeMarcus tagged him on the LinkedIn post. You said that it took 3 months of you building that relationship, going back and forth, and then eventually I believe you said that you signed him. So that's the other thought process that players, I believe, have to think about is you have to stop looking at everyone as like a one-off, like, oh, is Coach Kim going to give me this? No? Okay, forget about him. On to the next. You have to start thinking about this is your network and you're building relationships with them and just treat them as humans, as people, right? Because at the end of the day, you never know where something may lead and you never know where that person may end up. So just building your network and being around more basketball people is going to do nothing but help you. But a lot of people will just do exactly what I said. They'll just pretty much go a one-off. Okay, he didn't say anything. And then if you said, say for instance, if you said, sorry, we don't have any opportunities, they may not even respond to that, or they might just say like, oh, okay, whatever. But the thing is, there's an opportunity for them now to communicate with you and maybe build a relationship in the future and say something like, oh, okay, Coach Kim, I appreciate it, but maybe in the future, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe in the future, when something comes up that he sees that could be of value to you, he could message you again, because now you can remember, who was that guy? That was that guy, Jose, who messaged me a few weeks or months ago. And then that's a way that you can kind of snowball the relationship. But yeah, that's a big thing, is thinking long-term for the players, because everything that I see today is basically a one-off scenario, a one-off situation for players.
I agree, man. I totally agree. And it's funny. I was actually talking to a player. I've never met him in person before, by the way. I've never met him in person, but we talk occasionally on Facebook. And even though I never directly signed him, I referred him to a few other coaches, who I felt could potentially give him his kickstart, to his first pro contract overseas. And, thankfully, one coach actually believed in his abilities, and he's signed over there. But, I guess the point I'm making is that, whether, like you said, if you can build a relationship and kind of expand your network the right way, it may not directly lead you to an opportunity right then and there, but it might lead to something later down the line.
Definitely. Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Coach Kim. So much value has been given. I really appreciate it, from how to message coaches, how the coach and owner relationship acts, the average day in a B3 team, so much value. Is there anywhere where players can potentially follow you or contact you, if that's fine with you, on social media or anywhere?
Yeah, for sure. Feel free to hit me on Instagram. It's coach.dkim. That's my username. And then even on LinkedIn, Daniel Kim. I don't know how many Daniel Kims are out there, but essentially just look for the photo where he looks like a coach, and they can hit me on my messages there anytime. But yeah, I'm always willing to respond back. It might not be right then and there, but it might be at some point where I will message people back and just let them know where I'm at, or how I can, or how I can potentially help them.
Thank you and take care.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.